And so beginning this, we begin with the compassion compass in terms of discerning action. So this is at the level of individual action, and then we'll move to structural action. So the compass helps orient us towards individual action and lays the foundation for us to engage in structural anti-racist activities. And so the stories in the compassion article highlight the time investment in the relationship formation that's needed to change someone's mind. We think this is really important, that anti-racism requires this kind of time investment and relational formation with ourselves and others. So cultivating racial resilience does not end today, it continues. It's a lifelong process of spiritual formation. And so the set of qualities, the 8 qualities of the compass then can help make us, can help make anti-racism into a habit. So a way of thinking that informs all that we do. This is really important because simply just listing specific actions easily leads to a legalistic application that becomes re-articulated to maintain racist norms. So, for example, I've seen a rash of BLM signs in my neighborhood as a result of this current wave of protests. And so I've wondered what else they're doing, because I've walked through my neighborhood before and these signs haven't been up, and racism has been a problem before this summer. And so I kind of wonder what else they're doing beyond this kind of performative anti-racism. Because we see this being really grounded in racial exceptionalism. So this idea that I put a sign in my yard and now I show that I care, well, it's something, but it's not much. It doesn't show what else is being done. And so the compassion compass helps orient us towards actions we can take that move beyond just performative anti-racism. And so this compass is helpful for everybody, but for white people invested in this kind of work, it's essential. So for those of you that have been steadfastly engaged in this program, you've likely noticed some kind of shift in moral certitude. So perhaps you're now questioning what you think you know and how to make sense of your shifting moral landscape. And this is kind of a normal part of becoming anti-racist, especially for white people. And so the compassion compass is helpful now more than ever for helping us to reorient our hearts and minds to the pulse of compassion-based anti-racism. And so the 8 coordinates then. So the first, each coordinate is balanced against another coordinate. And so each one is held then in creative tension with another, and these have to be balanced for the compass to accurately guide us. And so the first is empowered personal dignity that is balanced against love for one's adversary. So empowered personal dignity. Compassion-based activism it's not passive before violation. So it boldly stands up for one's personal dignity. It speaks truth to power, refuses to be shamed, and asserts one's worth before those committing the violation. So for BIPOC folks, I think that this coordinate is fairly straightforward. So in a world that tells you both directly and indirectly that you're not worthy of being loved unless you assimilate to the prescribed standards of performing whiteness, claiming your personal dignity in this context is a radical act. So in the words of Alice Walker, the poet and author, it is making the conscious decision to love yourself regardless. That this in itself for BIPOC folks is a radical act of empowered personal dignity that subverts systems of oppression. I want to emphasize for us as white people that in the context of race, our personal dignity is already empowered because we are white. So we're not at risk of racial violation, rather we are at risk of racistly violating others. So instead, being worthy of respect and claiming our personal dignity in this context involves holding ourselves accountable for our own internalized racism. We claim our dignity when we take seriously critiques from BIPOC folks that we are acting racistly. This is balanced against love for one's adversary. So compassion recognizes the humanity of the other. They too know suffering. They have capacities for love and have a compassionate core. As firmly as compassion-based activism fights for the dignity of the oppressed, it preserves the dignity of the oppressor as well. So to paraphrase king, let no one pull you so low as to make you hate them. This is an excellent quote that really clearly and succinctly summarizes this point. So once more, for us as white people, we need this one because we are the oppressors, we are the adversaries, and we are more than our racist behaviors. And so love for one's adversaries is important for us to be able to transform. Then we move to universal inclusivity, which is balanced against firm limits around violation. Universal inclusivity, the compassion that sustains anti-racism, extends to all human beings, so none are excluded from its embrace. Certainly, we all have inclinations to demonize others as egregiously over the line and hopelessly irredeemable so that we can dismiss them and their humanity. But compassion-based anti-racist activism embodies a radical inclusivity that refuses to place limits on those whom we will treat with dignity, compassion, and hope for restoration. For us as white people, this is good news because racism lives within us. For many, this universal inclusivity is rooted in a cosmic source. For us as Christians, this is rooted in God. I love Thich Nhat Hanh. He's Buddhist and one of the original champions of engaged Buddhism and bringing it into the world. So Thich Nhat Hanh describes the web of interconnectedness in which all of us are one, each of us participating in one another's suffering and joy. And I think this resonates across religious traditions. This certainly resonates with us as Christians as well. It's a much larger principle than any one religion can claim. And this is balanced against firm limits around violation. So as much as compassion-based anti-racist activism extends love and dignity to all human beings, it does not allow violation to go unchecked. It draws firm boundaries around those who are dangerous and sequesters those who are unrepentantly violent and racist. Compassion-based anti-racist activism and putting firm limits around violation also invites a radical reconciliation with even the most hardened perpetrator, while acknowledging that reconciliation has conditions. So when violation has occurred, relational restoration requires the offending party to acknowledge the offense, to show remorse, make restitution, and commit to rehabilitation that prevents future offenses. So at the macrostructural level of racism, this has not happened in the United States. White people have not engaged reconciliation for the legacy of slavery and racism. And when the perpetrator is recalcitrant, this may involve isolating or sequestering the person, and then grieving the brutalities they must have endured to have become so calcified. So even as we're sequestering them, we don't dehumanize them in the process, but we don't allow them to continue perpetrating the violence and dehumanization from their woundedness. Then we have grounded in non-reactive presence, which is balanced against openness to the other's truth. So grounded in non-reactive presence, compassion-based anti-racist activism's responses to racism embody an inner stability, even in the midst of challenge, conflict, or attack. We can all become reactive at times, hijacked by fury, indignation, self-righteousness, dismissiveness, and so on. We become reactive when we lose our grounding in the truth of our self-essence, in the core of our compassion. In this state of reactivity, we see our opponents through the lenses of our own fears, indignations, and racist ideologies. When we reconnect with our compassionate core, we become grounded, and the rest of the anti-racist compassionate action circle opens to us with clarity. This is balanced against openness to the other's truth. Compassion-based anti-racist activism recognizes that our adversaries are fighting for something that feels life-threatening to them. Their behaviors and ideologies are rooted in needs that feel essential to them, or in suffering out of which their positions were forged. Here we seek to understand, with genuine openness, the truth within an adversary that informs their life posture. So here, if we remember Harold, What we see in Harold is a man who has worked his whole life to provide for his family. And now, because of the mechanisms of capitalism, that is outsourcing, downsizing, automation, and so on, his work is not valued or respected. And he resorts to racist ideologies to explain his situation, because those are the most salient explanations, because racism is normal in the United States. So for us as white people with good intentions to be anti-racist, we usually think of people like Harold as our adversary. The essence of an adversary is dehumanization. We don't think of BIPOC folks as our adversaries because of our intention to be anti-racist. However, racism is normal, and to varying degrees, we remain unaware of the racist ideological lenses that filter our perspective of BIPOC folks. So without continually reflecting on the way we embody racism, we will continue to dehumanize BIPOC folks in various ways. We will continue to see them as our adversary, even when we don't consciously think we are. We need to cultivate spaces that are genuinely curious about the core concerns, the life experiences, the deep terrors that inform persons who embody positions, not only contrary to ours, but offensive to us. When people feel listened to, heard, extreme positions relax, and the heart of the matter can be revealed. The possibility for authentic relationships becomes possible in contexts where we don't feel like we'll be judged or shamed. And then finally, strategic focus on systemic violence and oppression, which is balanced against imaginative social problem solving. So strategic focus on systemic violence and oppression. Compassion-based, anti-racist activism involves strategic analysis of the complex web of social structures and relationships that comprise race and racism. This is what we've been engaged in throughout this process. Here we seek education about the systemic causes of racism in our world, and we seek to both free those captive to these systems, including ourselves, and to transform the systems themselves. No one is born racist, but we are all born racialized. People engaged in racist behavior are themselves shaped by and enslaved to the racializing forces that give rise to racism in the first place. This is balanced over against imaginative social problem solving. So the necessary deconstruction involved in analysis of systemic racism sometimes moves us toward inaction and away from problem solving. Or we get boxed into binary and polarizing options. So we become immersed in the myth of redemptive violence, which comes to us from Walter Wink. So that's attack or be attacked, or that somehow violence itself is redemptive. And this eye for an eye mentality is not redemptive. There's nothing redemptive about violence. And so the balancing force to this then is the imaginative social problem solving. Compassion-based anti-racist activism is free, creative, imaginative, playfully innovative, out-of-the-box possibilities that might diffuse tensions, shift power dynamics, and invite an alternative relationship between the parties involved are characteristics of such actions.